Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, as always, Alex, and with me tonight I have Logan.
Good evening, Alex.
How are you, Logan? We've got a couple of games to get through that we've had in the past week. A couple of good draws, a couple of handy points to get on the board. First against Villa and then against Wolves. We'll start with the Villa game. A lot of talking points out of this game, obviously, with the return of Steve Bruce to the KCOM and a couple of players as well, but also a very handy point on the field. How did you see the game? Did you see it as a point gained or 2 points dropped?
Yeah, interesting game, and as you mentioned, the sentimental value of the player relationship and also the manager and Brucey returning to the KCOM. It always was going to be one of those games that had that extra feeling or motivation to beat them, particularly after the draw earlier on in the season. I think it was opening day, actually.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, opening day.
if memory serves me correctly. And yeah, obviously a very similar result in the sense that we took a point, as you mentioned, against a team that's, certainly, as we know, we're familiar with Steve Bruce, is probably going to cause some damage or certainly be a team that you would like to avoid in the playoffs, but they will be there and they will be a difficult side. So I think for where we find ourselves placed on the table, despite dominating large patches of the game and looking probably certainly the better side in the second half. Disappointing not to get 3 points, but I think that at this stage of the season to take a point, given the feeling that was in the game and the fact that any point at the moment is a point gained, given the position we find ourselves in, we'll take it.
Yeah, as you say, the position we find ourselves in, every point, it kind of ekes us closer to safety. And it was a great game in the sense that from the first whistle, basically, Jared Bowen takes a shot at goal 30 seconds into the game. It looks like it's going to be a very attacking sort of game, a lot of promise. Ended up nil-nil, which we can't be too disappointed with. It gives us an extra point towards safety. But then, as you say, the sentimental reasons, Bruce back at the KCOM, Snodgrass, El Mohammadi, Chester, all in the opposition lineup, which is a bit unsettling to see. Um, Bruce has a great record against former clubs. Obviously, we experienced the positives out of that with the record against Sunderland under Bruce. So I guess it's a positive that we got 2 points this season against Villa, the Villa side under Bruce. What was your take of that sort of return and the emotion around having Bruce back at the KCOM?
Really, a kind of a strange or weird feeling, if you will. I think that Steve Bruce returning to the KCOM should feel somewhat romantic. There should be some kind of nostalgia in there where all the City faithful automatically default to the good times that we experienced under Bruce. Obviously, he's our most successful manager, and I guess the fact that he was incredibly endeared but to the fans, and he was very well liked across the board. He certainly taught us how to defend very solidly for a long period of time. And I think that that was probably the attributes of Steve Bruce that we always knew we were going to have. And at times we were critical of his attacking form, but they were the patches. We always had a resilience about us under Steve Bruce. So I think that the thing that soured the feeling was that some fans still obviously hold that little bit of grudge, regardless of whether they understand why he left. But I think it was the fact that he left after the season and on terms where it was obviously not a workable relationship with the Allen administration, which seems to be a common trend. But I think that we could have, or certainly a lot of people would have liked to have seen him stick it out and continue on because he was so well liked and did produce some incredible moments at his time managing the club.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say the ill feeling that was directed towards him sometimes to do with his tactics, and you can see the same sort of emotion directed at him from the Villa supporters, at least during the last week, where they've kind of gone onto a bad patch of form, struggling towards the playoff places. Couple of draws, couple of losses. I think they lost to QPR a couple of weeks ago, who we face this week. And then obviously the draw against us, where you would think, from their point of view at least, that sitting fifth in the table, they'd expect 3 points against us. And there was a bit of frustration towards Bruce. And you look at that reaction sometimes and you think, oh, geez, our last promotion season to the Premier League, there was a bit of that frustration towards him as well. And I think around the same patch of the season, in fact, February, March, where we dropped off the results and it kind of cost us those automatic promotion places. And then, of course, they've gone on and beaten Reading, I think it was during the week. I can't remember who they had during the week where they won 3-0 or 4-0 or something like that. And you sort of see that bounce back, and it's almost voyeuristic in a sense. You look at the Villa supporter base and you look at how they react to Bruce and how they're going during the season. You think, gee, that was us a couple of seasons ago, and it's very familiar and very similar to how we sort of experienced life under Bruce as well.
And I find that remarkable as well when you think about the club Aston Villa and how large their fall from grace was, and the fact that they lost the dressing room and they had a few managerial changes, and there was so much going wrong at that club. To find themselves where they are now under Bruce, and
Yeah,
obviously he's brought in some great players, and they're in playoff. Well, they're going to be in the playoffs rather. Uh, and we'll do a damn mighty fine shot at winning the thing if Steve Bruce has anything to do with it. So yeah, as you mentioned, there's been some incredible parallels between his time at City and his time at Villa. But I think if there's any advice for the Villa fans out there, it's sit tight, because he's proven. And if there's any manager that knows their way out of the Championship in England, he's certainly the man.
yeah, and you're absolutely right. I remember early in the season, I mean, I don't want this to become too much about Villa rather than us, but I remember early in the season, a lot of their supporters were basically asking for his head because they weren't, sitting in the promotion places, or the automatic places perhaps. And I remember thinking that it was a bit ridiculous that they were thinking that when you think, as you say, they had Lambert recently, they've had um, um, uh, his name's gone out of my head now, but the current Scottish manager as well. But they've had a couple of pretty dour, disappointing managers at their helm, which has meant that they've been relegated, which has meant that they struggled to even stay in the Championship at one point. And Bruce has kind of come in and turned that around, and he's given that club a bit of resiliency again, and has them sitting in those playoff places, as you say. And I think looking at the four teams sitting in the playoff places at the moment, if it's not Villa that go up, it'll be Fulham. But there's not a whole lot that separates those two clubs. And I think, as you say, Bruce, if you want to look for a manager that will get you out of the Championship, Bruce is pretty much your man.
Yeah, look no further. Exactly. And I think that all of those feelings, probably the fact that he coincided with a return to the KCOM, where they're sitting, where we're sitting, probably did have a little bit of feeling, but for some reason just didn't seem to have the warm, fuzzy feeling that I suspect that some people were expecting.
Alex McLeish was the manager I was thinking of. He's the current Scotland manager. He was there for a little bit. But yeah, so a good point gained there against Villa, I think. And as you say, team sitting in the playoff places coming to a team that's sitting pretty much fighting for relegation, a point is a pretty good result in that one. As it was against Wolves a couple of days later. A 2-2 draw with Wolves, went 1-0 down early, but fought back and were actually leading 2-1 at one point in the game, and then conceded the lead late to Wolves. And it was an interesting game because going into it, you looked at the Wolves lineup or you looked at the players available for Wolves, and you thought, well, Neves was going to miss out. I think Njai was also missing through a suspension as well, or it was perhaps another one of their players. But they had a whole lot of attacking talent, creative talent missing in that game. And you thought, gee, we're actually a chance here to get a result, if not a win, at least a draw. Um, you look at the lineup that we put out, and okay, we rotated the players a little bit, and perhaps going into the game, you look at that lineup, you think, well, maybe we're not going to get the result that we could potentially get if we were going full strength. But the players, as sometimes happens, sometimes you see the weaker lineups and you think you're not going to get a result, and then they sort of are the ones that actually pull out the great result. Myler getting the penalty, Grzycki creating the chance that led to an own goal that gave us the lead. Suddenly these players are really sort of lifting and pulling for the team, and it was great to hear from Adkins that Myler's got that passion back. I don't know if he really ever lost it. He's always been a very passionate player for the club. And we played a fantastic game against Wolves, and it was almost the point that's basically secured our safety.
Yeah, arguably, I still think that there's a little bit of work to do before we can say that we're home and host, particularly knowing how the Championship operates and how anyone can beat anyone. But as you mentioned, another point, 2 points in as many games against two teams that are in the top six and league leaders as well. No less than. So two huge points and 2 points that were probably somewhat unexpected. Although I think that the most optimistic to City fans probably did fancy us to pick up some points against those two teams. So I think huge result against Wolves. It certainly does seem after the most recent two games that we've seen that a few things have changed in the background at City, and there does seem to be a bit of a different feel around the place. I think players are starting to adjust to life under Atkins, and there does seem to be a bit of competition for places again, particularly after Dawson's form against Villa. When defence has clearly been our frailty, particularly in those central roles, it's nice to see some kind of renewed feeling, and that is capped off by the performance of Wolves, as you mentioned.
So you've touched on there that you think that there's a bit of work to be done before safety is secured. I think we're 7 points clear at the moment of Barnsley, who are sitting in 22nd. How many points do you think, or how many wins or points, yeah, do you think that we would need to secure that safety? I mean, 6 games remaining from our point of view, 7 games for Barnsley. Do you think another win does it, or do you think there's still going to be a bit of competition and that we'll just kind of have to keep going until the end of the season?
I think the biggest thing standing in our favour at the moment is also the fact that the goal difference that we have is far superior to any of the teams that are placed around us. So, whilst the league table does tell us that we are 7 points clear, I believe, of Barnsley, it's closer to eight. I can't really see Barnsley winning three of their last 7 games. Although, if you take a look at the form of Birmingham, who were stuttering, they seem to have turned the corner very quick as everyone starts to uh, really dig in for that dogfight to scrape out of that bottom few placings. I think that 4 points is probably what we need. I think 45 points will see us clear and safe without a doubt. I think anything short of that, we just have to keep looking over our shoulders. So a win and a draw from our final 6 games, I think, will be more than enough.
So you say a win and a draw, and I guess if we look ahead to our next 2 games, which we've got coming up this weekend and then midweek next week, it's a great chance to get at least a dent in that points total needed. QPR at home and then Burton away. We'll start with QPR at home. Very disappointing result away at QPR earlier in the season where we took a 1-0 lead early in the game. I think we were leading at half time, even from memory. That could be wrong. But then collapsed late in the game. It was a very typical sort of Slutsky performance at the time. There was a lot of criticism around his management about the fact that we were conceding these leads late in games. Um, Lost that game 2-1, but this is a great chance to make amends. QPR, decent form lately. They've taken points at Fulham and Villa as well, I believe. A draw at Fulham, a win at Villa. So not an easy opponent by any stretch of the imagination, but a great chance for us to sort of make a dent and inroads, as you say, into um, securing survival for another season.
In the strangest way, despite having such a dour season and being on the end of some very disappointing results, I do feel that we've kind of handled ourselves very well against the bigger teams. I think about the current week, we can draw from that. Also, when we had that run of form around the Christmas period where we played Leeds and Derby in short succession, who were high flying at the time, we've always seemed to live for these bigger games, yet have kind of started against the teams that in previous years, like your Prestons and uh, the game that I think Brentford perhaps, games that we've dropped points that were just not in Forest rather is the game I'm thinking of. Um, we've dropped points that we just certainly shouldn't have even gone close to. So I think that when we look at the season as a whole, I don't think City have anyone to fear, and I think that a QPR opponent is certainly a matchup that is probably about even as far as we're concerned, as far as how teams are playing and on paper. I would be very disappointed if we weren't to get at least a point against them. I think that the tricky fixture is the Burton away game. I think that they are the kind of ones that we've stumbled on, and I think that Burton, certainly when they look at their position in the league at the moment, they will have us earmarked as a game that they must win, and I think that they will play out of their skin to try and do anything to take 3 points.
Yeah, I think it's the most frustrating element of the season, as you've said, is the fact that we do lift our game for those um, higher quality opponents, I suppose, in terms of your Wolves and your Villas, your Fulhams, and those sorts of teams who are really flying in the championship. But when they've come to the KCOM and played us, or when we've played them in various games, we've actually performed quite well. And you can sort of see that our squad player for player can actually match those greater teams. It's the consistency that we're lacking that's really meant that we're down where we are. Because as you've said, you look at our goal difference, and our -6 goal difference is okay. Granted, Sheffield Wednesday is only a couple of places above us with a similar goal difference, but you look at the amount of goals scored, and we're actually performing a lot better on that front, at least, than our league position would suggest. And you think if we could actually tighten up our defence, perform a little bit better, we could have actually had a whole lot of a better season than we had. And it's frustrating, I guess, from a point of view that Slutsky was obviously looking at us being a much more attacking side and hadn't focused as much on the defensive side, and that might have cost us a lot of points early in the season. But you look at the game against Wolves midweek this week where we drew 2-2, and we really weren't that different from them, even with our second string compared to their second string. Um, and it's maybe a case of an opportunity wasted where the squad itself could have potentially performed a whole lot better and has really underperformed this season. Um, I guess it's just one of those things that you take into next season and try and build on for the coming campaign. Um, but yeah, I mean, QPR is a great opportunity to take 3 points. As well as they've been travelling, it really should be a game that we look to take 3 points out of. Um, and hopefully push on from there. Burton, as you say, it's a really danger game away at a team that needs to win. They're coming last in the championship at the moment, which is in itself remarkable that Sunderland have sort of pulled themselves up to potentially pull themselves out of that quagmire. But um, Burton, yeah, it's probably the more challenging game out of the two.
Oh, without a doubt, and I think that it's one even the extra incentive for them with Jackson Irvine being in the Tigers lineup as well. There's a lot of things that make that game a tricky one, and I think that QPR is the one. If we were to get 3 points against QPR and drop points at Burton, whilst it wouldn't be a very promising sign, losing to the team as you mentioned at the tail of the championship, I think I'd probably accept that at the moment.
Yeah, I think mathematically speaking, if over the next two games, I mean, if Barnsley were to lose both games, if we can take 4 points out of the Burton and QPR games, I think we're essentially mathematically safe. It might take an extra game after that. I'm not too sure. I think it's a winnable game as well, the next one that we will play. But essentially, if we could get a win and a draw in our next three games, potentially our next two games even, that would essentially secure our safety, which would be a pretty amazing thing to do when considering I think there was, at one point we were in the relegation zone and really had our backs up against it. And to kind of pull ourselves clear with a couple of games to go would be quite a performance. But I mean, as you touch on, for Burton, Irvine coming back to the ground where he really sort of made his name in the championship would be an interesting storyline. And then you've also got the QPR clash where we'll have Luongo playing against us. So he's been in great form lately as well. So it'll be interesting to see another Aussie up against us and potentially in great form.
Yeah, without a doubt, and it is good to see from an Aussie perspective. Massimo Luongo finally starting to show what he's capable of at QPR. I know that he's had a pretty positive start there, and then seemed to die off a little bit, but seems to have been part of a late resurgence, which is really promising to see. But certainly, let's hope that on the weekend he's well below his game and City turn up ready to take all 3 points in that fixture.
Absolutely. So, what's your score prediction for the two games? It sounds as if you're sort of predicting perhaps a win against QPR, a draw against Burton, but what sort of scores are you looking at?
I feel that we've come to a kind of boil over point at City around the time where we ended up beating Forest away, and there just seemed to be this simmering feel where we were about to explode, and then obviously when we went to Ipswich and won 3-0 and had that kind of feel. So I'm actually predicting 2-0 against QPR. I think it'll be quite a comfortable fixture, and I think it'll probably be the best game we've played this season. I think that all signs point towards that, which is always a troublesome thing to say when you're talking about City because of the danger that they've inflicted on us over the years of pain. But I think 2-0 against City, and I think that Burton, I actually fancy them to nick it 1-0, but am hopeful for a kind of 1-1 draw.
Yeah, I think I was saying to Mitch last week, it's very typical of City when you go into a game that you're expecting to lose, they'll end up nicking something out of it, and if you're going into a game that you're expecting to win, we'll end up dropping the points. Look, I'm with you. I think we will beat QPR. I think they've been in good form lately, but we've been in great form as well, and it's a game that will really be up to win. And I could see a 1 or a 2-0 win in that one, or maybe a 2-1 sort of victory. I get the sense. I mean, Burton have sort of found their scoring boots lately, and been nicking a few goals against the better teams. But I do get the sense that we should potentially be winning that one. I'm thinking 1 or 2-0, maybe a 1-1 draw. Uh, if they are to nick something, I can't see them getting the win, but stranger things have happened, and it is getting to that point of the season where those teams at the bottom will be that desperate for a win that they might be able to pull something out. But if we can get 2 wins out of these 2 games, I think that would be a fantastic result and really sort of boost us up the table and pretty much secure safety, which would be great to do this early in the campaign, essentially, before the end of the season. Um, but we'll move on from the games and we'll talk a little bit about the off field because there has been a little bit of interesting development off the field insofar as the club's actions and responses to the trust's discussions with them in recent fan meetings. And I think it was earlier this week we actually saw that the club changed the Facebook page to Hull City from Hull Tigers, the Instagram account from Hull Tigers to Hull City, and have also started using the hashtag HCAF, of course, for Hull City AFC on Twitter, which um, I mean, I guess from some perspectives, it's very little effort to change those sorts of things, but uh, it's hard not to see that as a very big step from the club because, of course, for years the club has been very reluctant to use even our name, Hull City, much less, Hull City AFC or the hashtag HCAF. It's great to see that the club's sort of making that step, and it's sort of that first step on that reconciliation path, and perhaps a sign of better things to come. What's your take on it?
It's a fearful one. I think that when we talk about the Alum administration, trying to kind of speculate and guess what they're going to do and what their motives are behind their decisions are always difficult ones to produce because I think that I kind of stand with you in saying that you and I were probably two of the most optimistic people for a long
Yeah,
time in trying to support the Alum administration when things started to go a little bit dour. And when the name change rebrand came in and the uproar and understandable that there was, I think that I could still somehow see merit in what they were initially trying to do until it became more and more clear that what they were trying to do was totally different to what they initially said. And I think that this is a step in the right direction, but it probably more to me suggests that they are on the verge of finding a buyer or have absolutely no interest and realize that the damage that the protests and the uproar that seems to be at every KCOM game, but actually well, at every away game as well, and the kind of disgruntled feeling that is around the fans at the moment, and they realize how difficult it is to sell a club when they certainly appear to be on that page. And I do think that the thought behind it is if we were to start winning the fans back over, or at least winning some of the fans back over, it may appear on the surface that things are a little bit rosier than they actually are. So I think that might be the thinking behind it, to try and settle a few of the more vocal upset fans, if you will. I'm not sure if it'll work, but I think it is a refreshing move, and it was very nice to look on and see those changes and see the old hashtag back as well. I think that it's something. Whilst it's not necessarily clear what the entire picture is kind of hoping to show, I think it is a step.
yeah, and I think, look, I mean, I can completely accept if there are people out there that say, oh, well, it takes 2 seconds to change a Facebook page name or that sort of thing. I can still appreciate that it's been 5 years, I think, since this whole name change debacle began, and it's obviously been going on since then, at the very least, that there's been this sort of divisiveness about the name of the club and how the club has sort of referred to itself. And I think any sort of action or any sort of effort towards unifying the supporter base and bringing back that sort of cohesiveness of referring to us as Hull City, referring to us as Hull City AFC, whatever it is always a good thing. And I think if the club is sort of making those steps towards that reconciliation, then hopefully that means, as you say, hopefully potentially it means that there's a buyer out there that's sort of waiting in the wings for the end of the season to take over the club, or at the very least, the owners sort of realizing, look, at the end of the day, uh, the best position the club can be in to give them the best selling price is to have the stands full, sellout crowds, well-performing team, high position in the table, all those sorts of aspects will all contribute to them getting the best selling price they can get. So and it's why, look, at the start of the season, I said to you, and I think I said to Mitch as well, um, I was always optimistic in the championship that the owners and the fans would be on the same page because from the owners' perspective, the higher we could finish, the higher the value they could get for the club, and from the fans' perspective, obviously, the higher we finish, the more chance we have of getting back to the Premier League. So I've always felt that in the championship at least, the fans and the owners should be on the same page. Hasn't necessarily eventuated this season, but it's always the hope that for next season the owners can sort of come to that realization that look, it's in their best interest for the club to be prosperous, and it's from the fans' best interest that the club is prosperous. So fingers crossed, this is a sign of better things to come. That in the summer we can hopefully make some additions to the squad, strengthen the squad, and really kick on from what was a not a great season.
Well, and Alex, let's not forget that when the Allams did take over the club and they bought it out, it was in a dour state, and there was
Yeah,
incredible question marks about the future of the club, and they came in as heroes, if you will. But paying off the debt and being able to invest, albeit a small portion, into a player budget, and basically, well, essentially did save the club from that kind of administration path that they were heading on. So for the Allams to be able to balk on this, they believed in the name change and they rebranded the club so much that they were able to compromise every kind of heroic feel or endearment that the fans did show towards them, in pursuit of this idea of being Hull Tigers. So for them to even balk and then to finally cave, and accept the changing the social media page and the Twitter hashtags and all the rest, it must have killed them, because I think it shows a total sense of surrender, and that these meetings that have been happening with the trust have obviously hit a nerve or got under the skin to a certain extent where they're on board. Whilst, as I mentioned before, I still question the motive, but I think that those meetings have gone a long way to helping them kind of crack in many senses, and that's why we've seen the positive change in the last couple of weeks.
well, here's hoping that regardless of what it indicates for the future, whatever it is, it's a sign of better things to come, and hopefully it's a sign that the club is really going to kick on in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months. And hopefully we can start that with a couple of wins in our next couple of games against QPR and Burton. But thank you for joining me tonight, Logan.
Not a problem, anytime.
And thank you everyone for listening in. Hopefully next time we are absolutely over the moon that we've secured our championship, I should say, safety, with victories against QPR and Burton, and we can kick on next season to aim for promotion back to the Premier League. But until next time, come on, City! You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning